organizations. In some ways, even after his death, it seems to me that Martin Luther King, his memory has been neutralized. A couple of weeks ago, I asked my students who are 12th grade and 10th grade to give me one line or one sentence that they could remember about Martin Luther King. And this is what it boiled down to. He was black, that was one. He had a dream, that was two. He was a civil rights leader. And then third, and the final one, he was killed or assassinated. So our children, all they seem to know, or at least many of them, probably not the ones in this district, of course, know that he was a black man who had a dream. In that, where do we get these images from? And what is the role the media has played in maligning and misinterpreting the legacy of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement? Well, civil rights activists in the 1960s charged that newspaper executives, who were almost always white, ignored and marginalized the movement. Major television stations like in Jackson, Mississippi, worked hard to defend segregation and deny access to opposing voices, both local and national. One source states that few exceptions, Southern newspapers and the Southern radio and TV stations carried very little news about Negroes and paid almost no attention to news involving racial issues. And research shows that local television news not only reported events, but also helped craft visual narratives for the viewers. In Richmond, Virginia, white newspapers depicted Birmingham demonstrations as deeply threatening to the nation's law and order and as a near riot without clear goals or coherent reasons. These editors focused almost entirely on the white side of the story, especially the police, and hinted that a racial war was underway. According to some publications, King had incited mobs of Negroes to turbulent street demonstrations in violation of local authorities. Today, we have much more media and many more outlets from which to choose, if we choose. But research shows that most people still get their information from televised news, and most of that news is local, with about 47% of those watching Fox News as a trusted source. So today, again, our information is determined by someone else, and some other entity defines our narrative. As I see the story of MLK and the racist movements defined by others, I question, too, how our present struggle is defined by others today, how the defining can move us into action or inaction as well. I see how the legacy of King as a man of peace is somehow used against us to the point of inaction. Calls from both liberal and conservative sources has placed him as an acceptable Negro, and that's now in what seems an after fact. The recent protests against police brutality and the assault on black people and Muslims and immigrants, always the same familiar refrain, what would MLK say? How would he, or would he have been so, if he had so desired to? During the protest police against brutality in Ferguson that erupted into riots, I'd hear co-workers say they need a Martin Luther King. Who is there to express their goals, and they have no plan? They are saying, I suppose, that we need a leader to articulate our desires and needs, and that we too should be nonviolent. There are many entries on what should or should not be done today about rioting and looting. I just want to say to you that I pulled this one line from Martin Luther King where he says to me, or he says to us, "It is not enough for me to stand before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be morally irresponsible for me to do that without, at the same time, condemning the contingent and tolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellions to get attention. And I must say tonight that the riot is the language of the unheard. Black leaders, organizations, and movement have always been discredited, marginalized, and interpreted through the lens of others. People still keep looking for Martin Luther King." Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you know what I normally, on my program, I normally use some quotes, from Dr. Martin Luther King. And one that I always use is, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Because I feel sometimes in these communities here of South Orange and Maplewood, we tend to become very silent on things that matter. And we wait until something drastic happens, and then we want to really talk about it. And I think it's time that we are no longer silent about things that matter. And there is another one that says, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at the times of challenge and controversy. Which is, you could always be standing on the sidelines and watching, but when there is controversy, it depends on where you stand. So that's some things. And finally, a man who won't die for something is not fit to live. So those are just some of the things that I actually, as I go through the program, as we go through the program, and Margie may have heard that, quite a bit. I sort of, give those quotes, about from Martin Luther King. So Margie, who are we gonna have?
I think TJ. Oh my goodness, another distinguished person. Would you like to start or?
Sure, I'll jump in.
Okay.
First, I wanted to reiterate support for the Get Out Fund. I really think that the foundation that Marjorie is trying to get started is a worthwhile endeavor for this community. As a teacher in South Orange and Maplewood for over a decade, I've always felt that although our two towns are often presented as the ideal in diversity, that quite often the students' experiences both in school and around town provide a different reality. So much so that I think that experiencing life outside of South Orange Maplewood, and if possible, outside of the United States, provides worthy experiences with which to build their worldview. And so this effort for the Get Out Fund is tremendously purposeful. So in the future, we plan to have more community events, festive, informative, party atmosphere, but to whatever degree you can support Marjorie and the efforts, it will definitely benefit the students 100%. Having said that, when we talk about Martin Luther King and the challenge of black leadership, I was specifically asked to focus on Martin Luther King as a prisoner of conscience. So I'll speak to that briefly. But I wanted to add to what Marjorie said. Martin Luther King, the I Have a Dream speech was in 1963, and it was early 1968 when he was assassinated. So we're talking almost 5 years after the I Have a Dream speech, where Martin Luther King was active and engaged. And one of my major critiques of black leadership, of the media, when it comes to our celebrations of Martin Luther King, is that far too often we stop at I Have a Dream. If we listen to the man for the last 4.5 years of his life, when he became more dangerous, if you read the FBI reports, he began talking and criticizing the United States more on the areas of race. He talked about racism. He talked about fighting against the war. He talked about capitalism. He talked about materialism, and when he went in, so to speak, as the young folks would say, on those issues, many would argue that that's when he became the ultimate threat, and it was time for him to go. One of the statements, wasn't even a speech, one of the statements that Martin Luther King gave that is most often quoted is the letter from a Birmingham jail. And so when we talk about Martin Luther King as a prisoner of conscience, I like to go there because it was in the process of trying to desegregate Birmingham, Alabama, that he was criticized by black and white clergy. He was criticized by people in the local area there that he had gone too far and that the civil rights movement was asking too much. And from that jail cell, as many before him, from Gandhi and his protege. Many we know that prison and jail has often been used as a place to think, to get thoughts together, and then to present a new idea. What Martin Luther King did in that letter from a Birmingham jail was explain to all of the clergy who were criticizing him why, in fact, it was necessary. And so he talked about the hoses that were being sprayed. He talked about the dogs that were being sicked on innocent black folks, women, and children. And so the need to stand up. He talked about when you face an unjust law, the need to protest the law, and if necessary, go to jail to show and demonstrate the unjust nature of the law. And so when we talk about prisoners of conscience, a lot of the work that I do is around political prisoners now, and these are people who were a part of the Black Panther Party, who were a part of the Black Liberation Army. And if you take the time to read their history and their biographies, most often those same individuals were a part of the NAACP Youth League, or the some Christian or civil rights organization, and it was only when they were beaten into the Black Panther Party, or they were a part of some experience with the police, some violent exchange, that led them to understand that just this nonviolent approach, it's not going to work. At some point, we need to be able to defend ourselves. And so, as prisoners of conscience, people learned from Martin Luther King and took a different approach. I would like to think that, people said he would be 86 today, right? Yeah. That in the time since that, Martin Luther King would have evolved, right, in his analysis of our situation. And so when we think about situations like, Ferguson, Missouri, we think of situations like the police murders that have taken place. Just as King said, what he said about the riots and how he couldn't condemn the people who were taking part in the riots without condemning the society, I think today he would say the same thing. Before he would go and condemn those in Ferguson who are demonstrating, those in New York who are demonstrating, some who are even getting arrested because of the passion with what they believe. I think he would point to a society that still, in 2015, allows policemen to shoot unarmed, innocent black people and get away with it. That still is a problem. It was a problem in 1965. It was a problem in 1945, 25, and since we've become, since we came here, to the United States as slaves. So I'm going to close. All right, I'm going to close, and hopefully we can open the dialogue a little more. There's a DVD called The Children's March. I don't know if anybody has ever seen this DVD, but it's about a march that took place in Alabama, and Martin Luther King, after trying to organize this march through the churches and with the adults, and he couldn't get people to sign on, mainly because of fear. Like the police in Birmingham and Alabama had done such a good job of instilling fear in the adult population that he could hardly get anyone to sign on. And what took place was he actually went to the generation, the next generation. And if you see this DVD, the footage, which I rarely see in all of our, mainstream presentations, you see, young, elementary and middle school age black children doing whatever it takes, by any means necessary, right? They were going to get to this march. And so you see footage of teachers in classrooms teaching at the board, and they turn around and the whole entire classroom is empty. We see footage of students jumping out of windows and running out of the school to get to this march. So when I think about some more, when I think about Get Out and what we're trying to do in this community, we want to get our children, black and white, Filipino, whoever is here, to the point where their passion for justice meets that, where they're willing to, again, if it calls for it, jump out of the school building, defy your parents, defy your grandparents for the sake of social justice. If we can get to that point, I think we'll be taking